Welcome to Phoenix Rising with Dr. Z. This podcast is all about conversations about healing and rising from the ashes of your grief and trauma. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Zampitella. It is my sincere hope that this podcast is going to give you the words and the understanding to help you heal through your grief and trauma.
I think it's helpful for people to kind of understand what this loss may have meant to them, to have space to maybe grieve for the sibling, because you spoke earlier about disenfranchised loss. It's a completely disenfranchised loss, but many of us do have a lot of grief about the sibling that we never got to meet, who is our sibling. And, there needs to be space to grieve for that person. And it's hard to grieve for a person we haven't met. So for a lot of people, there's this meaning reconstruction where we're trying to kind of piece together who that person was, often with fragments, because we don't get much as the person born after. So piecing together with fragments, trying to kind of build up an identity for that person who we never met and give it the space and kind of honor that person in the way that feels right for us, if that's what we need to do.
Mm-hmm. What might be some reasons why a family would want to hide the child who was either, adopted out or was, who had passed? Because I'm sitting here going, why wouldn't my mom talk about that? Maybe it was built into the shameful aspect of having gotten, pregnant at, in the 60s and, what was embedded in her mind from the family, specifically her mom, about wanting to hide it. But I mean, maybe in that case, I can personally understand it. I don't know. She's not around. I wish she was around because I would ask her about it now. I really wish she was around. But I'm wondering, I mean, is that something that you have an answer to of some sort?
I mean,
why? Why do we hide it?
I think, yeah, there can be a lot of reasons. In some cases, there can be like shame or stigma around certain types of losses, right? For sure. I also think pain is a really big, people have a lot of pain. In some ways that people cope with pain is they just kind of repress. I'm not going to look at that. I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to shove that down and I'm never going to look at it again because it's so dreadfully painful. I also think, you and I are about the same age, going back to kind of the messaging that people had around grief when your mom adopted her child out, when my parents, both of these things happened before we were born back in the 60s, and, again, the concepts around grief and, it was the expectations. Well, it's been 6 months, so you're supposed to be over this, so those types of messages that I think people also got and kind of internalized. Well, I need to move on. I need to move on. And so I need to cut the ties to this loss. I need to just move on. That's what I'm supposed to do. And the easiest way for me to do it is to not talk about it. And that they still carried so much pain, and it's not like they could just, divorce themselves from it, but there was this attempt to do that. And maybe a fear also of people seeing how much pain they still had around it to talk about it. I think.
I don't know that my mom ever talked to anybody about it. I doubt she talked to my dad about it.
Mm-hmm.
Not because they didn't love each other. I just don't think it would have become part of their communication.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Anyway, I got a billion things going through my mind, just wishing I could talk to her about. And that's another thing. Okay, so there's something. Maybe it's a little self-serving, but I don't care. I'm sure other people deal with it too.
No.
Now I'm at an age where I'm ready to go, hey, what happened? Like, let's talk about it. But nobody's there for me to talk about it.
Which is why it's good for people to ask the questions when they can.
Right. But what do we do when we can't?
It's hard. There's no easy answer to that.
I'm throwing something at you. It's like, what the hell do you do?
No, it's, I have one patient that I worked with who was born after loss, and, both of his parents have died. And that's been a big source of pain for him, not being able to talk to them more. He has talked a bit to his older sibling, and that's been somewhat a little helpful. I think it still hasn't replaced the conversations he wishes he could have had with his parents. So I don't think there's an easy answer of how we make meaning of these things, or we want answers from people who aren't here to give them. It's painful.
I wonder if kind of having, there are times where there's a lot of unfinished business with people who
Mhm.
have passed. And I wonder if that might not be one of those ways of navigating how you feel about it, what you wish you could have said,
Yes.
that might be applicable to this. And also maybe some, and you probably jump on this way better than me, but maybe some expressive arts where, you actually do design what family would be like if that child was invited into the family system, as opposed to not talked about in the family system. Like, what would that look like? But one thing that I'd like to try to do for people who are watching and listening to the podcast is, okay, well, that's real great, and this is a horrible problem, but what can I do with it? My one thought, a couple thoughts, is writing a letter to your whoever you want to write to. So in my case, it'd be my mom. Writing a letter to my mom, going, "Hey, I really wish I would have done this. I wish I would have asked this. I wish I would have asked that." And then either I keep that to myself or I share that with my therapist or a friend or whatever, and then write a letter back to myself from my mom,
Yes.
and
Yes.
making sure it's a dialogue, not just one-sided, but then writing back to myself from her voice, and then having that dialogue as long as I need to, and then perhaps putting a ritual around that if I want to, um, kind of find that forgiveness. If there's like, I'm feeling a little, I understand as a psychologist, I understand it, but it doesn't mean the pain's not there. And I'm
Yeah.
going to name it, and I'm not going to be the gift child that tells me I'm not allowed to be, upset with my mother about this, because, God forbid I'm upset and disappoint her. Here, I need to know as my own self.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so that might be one way. And then there's other ways that we've learned through meaning reconstruction, as we're trying to kind of reconstruct that world by which we understand ourselves. Um, there are some creative ways we might be able to do that. Am I outside
Absolutely.
of my area of clinical
Yeah.
competency right now?
Yeah. And, as an art therapist, like, I've made a couple different, memorial objects for my sister, that, it was really powerful for me. I have one here. I hadn't planned on. Do you want me to show
Oh
you?
my God, of course I want you
I
to
had
show it.
I swear I did not put it, it's just on the shelf, but I made this little memory box for my sister.
All right, tell us
So
about your box.
this bow came off of one of her little dresses that my mom had saved, and by the way,
Oh,
it wasn't until my mom was, like, very old and moving and kinda getting rid of things that I took a few things, because I never kind of had a right to touch any of those things, so again, that was kind of symbolic that I actually had a right to have something that belonged to her, or that I could touch something that belonged to her, because everything was kind of kept as, like, this important relic that I didn't have a right to, but then
it's
when my
also
mom
like
had to
almost like a
downsize.
museum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that was that, and then, so
So
on
for
the
people who are
inside.
just listening, can you describe what you're doing right now?
Yeah, so I made it out of a little tin box. So I have on the cover of it, I have, like, a little pink ribbon that came off of one of my sister's dresses, and I put some seashells and little beads, and also a ribbon, and, these little roses from this vintage piece of jewelry, so I kind of covered the box, and some gold. So it feels very precious and kind of symbolically important, kind of putting these little special gems there. It was kind of this honoring of my sister.
I'm
And
thinking about
then
how the shells are always, when I think of shells, I think of water.
yeah, true, true,
Not that
yes,
I'm here to interpret your memory box.
yes.
I just
So it was a funny process because I knew, and again, what I always tell people as an art therapist when I'm working with people is I tell them not to kind of plan ahead or to overthink it, but to just kind of have a bunch of materials and to reach for what they want to reach for, and to kind of figure out maybe later why they wanted that thing or what it meant, but just to kind of to get in the flow of creating and go with whatever it is. And for me, I realized right away I wanted to get some wax and kind of pour some wax into my box. So, and I didn't really know why, but again, I trusted this is kind of what came to me that I wanted to do. So I went into the kitchen, and as luck would have it, all I had were these pink candles, which is kind of funny because we always put pink roses on my sister's grave. So pink was always, again, so this wasn't a chosen choice, but that's what I had. So I started, so I was sitting, So I was sitting at our dining room table and it was covered with all these different art materials, a lot of paper and scraps and fabric and different things. And I have these 2 pink candles, and I'm laughing now because it's kind of a funny memory. So I have the box and I have my pink candles. So I decide to light both of them simultaneously. So I in each hand have like this lit candle. So my hands are kind of full holding these 2 lit candles, and I look down all of a sudden. I'm sitting there at the table. I've got this table full of this like very combustible, like all these
Oh,
and I'm sitting there with these 2 candles, and all that came into my head was I thought, "My God, I am going to set the house on fire." And this was but it was so perfect because this was a very taboo thing that I was actually allowing myself to have space to create this thing about my sister who was always kind of like I had no right to, and I had no, you know, there was kind of this thought that this loss wasn't my loss. So, and that I was kind of breaking this family taboo that here it was like I was actually even using little pieces of her coveted dresses in my art therapy project. I was kind of breaking all the rules. So I'm like, my God, I'm about to set the house on fire. So it was very powerful. So I poured this wax and then the top of it, there's kind of this image of these little flowers. So it's very much kind of like a memorial,
okay.
pink wax. And then I also want to share, this is kind of a funny little story. I put this little sign in here, which is I had this vintage game I found. I think I got it maybe from a yard sale or something.
Can you describe the vintage signs
So
to
it's a
people?
little sign and it looks like a little tiny street sign of like a child crossing the street sign. But the funny thing is, so this came from a vintage game. So it doesn't look like the child crossing signs we have on the street now. It looks like the very old ones. And this must have been the ones that they had in the early 70s when I was a little kid, because when I opened this game that I got, like I said, at a yard sale or something that was old, I saw this sign and immediately I looked at it and I thought, oh my goodness, there's my brother and sister.
Oh,
And it wasn't just kind of a fleeting thought. It was this instant, very powerful kind of I was like, oh, there's my brother and sister. And so I realized these are the signs that must have been on the road when I was a very little child. And I think I was looking for her and I was trying to figure out who she was and where she was. And this image somehow spoke to me. And I thought of it as her, as a very little kid. And it came back to me when I found this sign. It was so powerful. So I put that in my little memory box. And then you can see there's also another little tiny piece of one of her dresses, this little plaid
oh,
dress,
that's
just a
so
little
cute.
piece,
Okay.
and more wax. And then on the bottom, I have some deep water. So that's really the lake, right?
Oh, wow. You know
Yeah.
what? And you said set the house on fire. And I was thinking to myself, when we think about, and again, I'm sorry if I'm in, but I'm not an art therapist, so I'm going to do it anyway. So I shouldn't do it. When you're setting the house on fire, I think to myself, as someone who has had her house completely demolished by a house fire, by the way, there is yeah, I'm blowing it up. That's it.
Yes.
It's all
I'm
coming out.
blowing it up.
Yeah. I'm setting this
Yes,
out, you know what I mean? So, I mean, I know
exactly.
yeah, so that's it.
And I
That was
didn't realize I was doing this with
right.
creating this memorial, but I was. And even to be here talking about this today and to write this book was there were scary pieces of it. Like, how are people going to respond to this? Like, do I have a right to talk about my loss? Is it okay? That is very much a common thing for people in my role.
Well, growing up, it sounds like that was a question, am I allowed to talk about this? So when you approached it from the perspective of actually writing your book and doing your research, sounds like that same theme came up for you, especially hearing that also from a lot of other people who
Yes.
are asked that question themselves. Because
Mhm.
I can't say that I felt like I could necessarily bring it up, or if I did, it would have been very short answers.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Um, and one thing I want to say about art therapy, I don't think people understand, and I know nothing about art therapy other than this. It's not about the product, it's about the process. It's just somebody who put that in my head. I can't imagine who that might have been, Sarah. But
Well, it's both. It's
it's
both.
but
The
there is
product
an
is
end to the
important
product.
too,
The product is
but the
important too.
process is
Okay.
equally important.
Okay, got it. Okay, see, I learned lots of new things today, and that
Yes.
helps. Okay.
Yes. So both are
Yeah.
important.
Okay.
And the product, one thing we talk about is it gives you this tangible record. So look, I have this box, which is my tangible record of that moment, and I can look back and so it's as you can see, it sits on my shelf. It's something that stays with me. So it's a product
Mhm.
that has meaning, right? But if somebody just looked at that box without knowing the whole story that I told you,
Right.
my process about the candles and everything, like there were so many, I could tell you even more. There's so many pieces of the process that were incredibly important in making this box, and you would miss it all if you just looked at the box and didn't know any of those stories and what my experience was of making it.
When you were telling us the story about making it, could you feel that? Like,
Yeah, it was
yeah?
really powerful. I have the memory of sitting there at my dining table and well, this probably isn't the smartest thing I've ever done, sitting here with these 2 flaming candles and all this, but just it was very powerful sitting there and thinking, "My God, I am going to set the house on fire."
So what do we s what could be a starting point? Like, let's say I've been born into loss in my family, and I wanna open up a dialogue with my parent. Not really quite sure how this is gonna go. What might be a way I can approach that?
I mean, I think everyone's parent is going to be different about how they are or are not open to discussing these things. Their relationships are different. All those pieces are gonna there's so many variations to that. I think, um, coming at it, in a place of, kind of empathy for the parent. I think that's one thing that can be complicated, and it was something that even Joanne and I had numerous conversations about as we wrote the book because, um, I think any conversation around this that makes any sense has to be grounded in empathy for the parent and their loss. And I think there also has to be room to talk about what the person's experience was who was born after, and people who encountered really severe replacement dynamics. And some of the stories are really, really intense about that. Um, that also was a really negative experience. And I think there's a taboo, understandably so, but a taboo in our society about kind of criticizing the bereaved parent, right? But that ends up then silencing the person born after because it's like, well, I can't, and for many of us, there'd be tremendous guilt to kind of say to your parents, like, you really messed this up because you treated me as a replacement that really harmed me and, my childhood. Or it's difficult if we know that that's grounded in our parents' loss. So it can be a tricky conversation,
Mhm.
but I think approaching it as in a place of kind of openness and empathy, while also, feeling like you do have a right to own your own needs and saying, it would really mean a lot to me to understand more, and it's actually something I feel like I need, and that
Mm.
you have a right to say that. You have a right to say that, while also being compassionate, with your parent and knowing that the loss that they've had of a child is something that's so unbearable. So having compassion for that, but also compassion for your experience. So how can both of those things be held?
Yeah, that's tough. I think what I'm hearing you say is, like, can we please look at your parents as being humans that did the best they could with what they had at the time? And,
Yes.
just trying to navigate that rocky landscape and not really
Yes.
knowing what to do, but also really not wanting anything to happen to the child that was born afterwards. How,
Yes. And I just want to add,
well,
Chrissy, I
yeah,
think there
yeah,
also
please do.
is room for people.
Yeah.
Many people are very angry at their parents.
I was just
That
gonna ask you
there's
that.
room for that too.
Okay.
There's room for that. There
So
has
what
to
do
be
they do with that? Because I mean, if you're trying
again.
to come at them compassionately, you I that parent may not be capable of holding those intense emotions of any kind of resentment or anger or anything.
Some again, I think some parents might be able to kind of look back and there can be some repair that it's like, I realize I did the best that I could at the time, and I also realized it really wasn't helpful to you or good for you when I did X, Y, and Z, and I'm sorry. I think that can be possible with some parents. I think with other parents, that's not gonna be possible. So I think it depends. And I think for the people who that's not going to be possible with, to try to find other places where, people they can talk to about it, understanding more about it. I think when we understand more about kind of the things that fuel us and the things that have been difficult for us, they lose a little bit of their sting, right? They're still there, but sometimes if we're able to frame things and realize, well, one of the reasons that my confidence was really low was about this, and to kind of put those pieces together and have understanding of ourselves sometimes can really help, even if it doesn't take away the bad experience. So, talking to a good therapist, reading other people's stories. I mean, part of what's in the book, which I hope anyone who's impacted might be interested in reading the book, this was really written. The goal of this book was to have it be a resource for people like me and who are born into loss, and also for parents and for families who are having another child too. But I think there's power in being able to read this and kind of recognize yourself in other people's stories, and to realize, well, this maybe this is some of the meaning this had for me. Maybe actually I'm not alone with this, and other people have lived through this, and this is some of the repercussions it had, and this allows me to connect dots in my own life. I think all of that is positive.
What might be some ways that this presents itself in relationships as somebody ages?
That's an interesting question. Um, for one thing, there's a chapter in the book about those born after loss and as they face parenthood themselves, and some of what that sometimes looks like. And there are people that we interviewed who decided they didn't want to be parents because I think part of their own experience made them feel worried about being in a parenting role. Um, there are people who were very anxious about losing their child. So, many different things that could happen in the parenting role, that kind of, like, again, a repetition of some of the loss and the trauma that gets kind of passed on and continued in the next generation. So there's definitely things about, as people approach parenting, things that can be complicated. Uh, and then even in relationships, there were some people that talked about, you know, kind of never feeling good enough in their family of origin. So then that they were then attracted to dating people who, made them also feel like they were never good enough. So this again, and you and I know in the therapy field, a lot of times when we have a complicated situation, we recreate it and recreate it because there's part of us that wants to master it. Like, maybe now finally this kind of rejecting person that I'm dating will suddenly accept me. So I'll have the acceptance that I always wanted from my parents, who were kind of rejecting and who never accepted me. Right. So there can be a recreation of some of those dynamics in people's lives moving forward, and relationships that can happen.
Yeah, it's kind of like, look, these people are treating me the way that you treated me, but they found me so valuable that they changed, which means I am valuable, even though you thought that I wasn't. Because
Yes.
here's the proof.
And I can finally win this battle that I tried
Yes.
to win my whole childhood and never won with you. I'll recreate it and I'll win it this time. So I'll feel better.
So really, the trying to not repeat that requires intentionality of, wow,
Yes.
this looks really familiar. I find myself being really familiar. I have to be drawn to, maybe I need to think about, what I actually do need out of a relationship, and not fall in love with potential, but fall in love with actually what is in front of me.
Yes, yes, and I think all of that leads back to what I was saying before, like the self-awareness, the connecting the dots, and I think if you do that, then you can be more clear about,
Hmm.
I think if you haven't connected the dots, you're not gonna understand that this, romantic relationship is mirroring some of the stuff from your childhood. You're not gonna understand that, so you're gonna continue to do it. Once you understand it, it's easier to kind of, um, choose a different course.
So, what are some ways that a person can grow from this, like rise from
Mm,
the ashes of this family dynamic that might have been destructive
yeah.
versus constructive?
Well, many people we talked about that as well in the interviews, and I mentioned earlier that it seemed like a disproportionate amount of people had gone into the helping fields, but many people talked about feeling like they were more compassionate, that it really allowed them to be very attuned to people. So again, like many other kind of averse experiences that people have in life, there's often that, although we don't want those averse experiences, when we can try to find a silver lining, it's always positive. And there certainly are silver linings that many people talked about becoming. You know, many of the people I interviewed talked about being like, I'm a very sensitive person, so that is something that I bring to the world. I'm trying to help others. I always know what other people are feeling. One person I remember said something to the effect of, I was always kind of scanning for what everybody was feeling in my family because there's so much grief and it was so difficult. So now I kind of always know what everyone's feeling, and so I can use that in a positive way in my life as an
Mhm.
adult and kind of be attuned and be helpful to people. So um, some of the strengths that people gain as a result of a bad experience can then be strengths that they put forward, right, in productive way, and a good part of their identity and something they can be proud of and use productively.
Yeah. I think one of the interviews that I did, oh God, a while ago, this is like pre-cancer, was with Bob Niemeyer and talking about meaning reconstruction, right? And saying like three things that we really are looking for during the meaning reconstruction process, amongst like a million other things. But, making sense out of what happened, kind of like a benign reason, like everything happens for a reason, or whatever you're telling yourself. Or, God never puts anything in front of you you can't handle. I'm not here to make sense of other people's stuff. I'm just saying this, then
Mhm.
the benefit finding that you're talking about. Like
Yep.
I would do anything to have my family back, but I can't. It's just the reality. So, what am I going to do with it that's going to allow me to grow and possibly even make an impact on my community, but also, like I said, make me reconsider my own priorities and values and morals and how I want to, what I find meaningful in my life so that, it's, it, I, I don't, I'm not living in pain. I have my pain within the context of this way of saying this kind of post-traumatic or post-loss growth that we can have, right? And
Yep.
then you've been talking a lot about identity today, and
Yes.
identity, like how do I understand who I am? And not only, my internal definition of that, like how are other people mirroring that? How is the world that what I've created in the world, like the work that I do, the things that you do, how does
Mhm.
that mirror back what my value systems are and what's important to me, um, and what feels safe, what doesn't feel safe, etc. So I guess I'm just thinking to myself when we consider that kind of post loss growth, also considering like if I'm becoming aware of this, like what if this is the first time I've heard about this even concept, right? And I'm going, oh crap, like I got to really kind of digest this a little bit and figure out what this
Yes.
means. Or I've got to think about my own children. And is there a way that I need to adjust my parenting or become aware of my parenting now that I'm becoming a little bit more conscious of, like you said, connecting the dots? And so that might be impacting. Um, and then even making amends if needed. And
Yes.
maybe it's not, or maybe it's opening up dialogue that we never opened up before. But and then finding creative ways to process it because you may not have the ways that you wish that you could have. Is there anything I'm missing there?
No, yeah, it's all such good stuff, and as you said, this may be, like, startling information for people who suddenly really realize, "Wow, I really was born into loss," and starting to look at that kind of for the first time. Also, as you mentioned, for parents who, um, you know, I will mention, like, there's this term that's become frequently used now that's called rainbow baby, which is refers to, people who have another baby after losing a baby to stillbirth, and, I know this will probably be controversial because many people really love the term, and I get it, it's a pretty sounding term, but I really, take issue with the term because, again, um, feeding back to kind of what we're talking about here, if you call the baby born after, if you call it the rainbow baby, it's very much linking that baby's identity to the one who died. And you want that baby's identity to be able to just be your baby, a separate thing, and not like, and even we think about the symbolism of like the rainbow. So it's the beautiful thing that comes after the rain, right? So it's very much kind of reinforcing this concept about a replacement, right? Which is not what, and again, everyone has really good intentions. People aren't trying to do these things, but those, even that type of language, is kind of lining up this perception. Um, so for parents just to be really thinking about, let me make sure that this baby that's born after, and like I said before, it can be a very beautiful, wonderful thing for families to have another baby, to have another child. Let me make sure that I'm embracing that child as its own unique person that's very separate from my loss experience, and I'm not merging their identity and their role with my loss. So that's really the goal.
That has got to be so hard to do. Like it sounds theoretically sounds like totally makes sense, but to really separate out, oh, gosh, especially if that grief has not really quite been integrated yet,
Mhm.
or if it's really close to the loss of the
Yeah.
child,
Yeah,
that's got to be hard to do.
it is hard. So again, for people who are, really still very actively grieving and having another child, to make sure that they're making space for their grief,
Yeah.
making space for their grief, and honoring the deceased child too, making space for the deceased and making space for the baby born after, and having that separation.
Oh my God. Well, what
Yeah.
an important topic, and one that, I mean, honestly, people just do not talk about. I mean, even thinking about in my own practice, this has not been something where somebody comes in and says, "Hey, by the way, this is my presenting thing that I want to talk about." Never. But
Yes.
you can find out in the course of you work with them. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
wait a minute. Let's bring that up.
Yeah, so it's so often under the radar, and it's astoundingly common. What I found is, like, as I started researching it and so talking more about it in terms of my book and my research, I found out I had friends, including you and others as well, who good friends of mine who also were born after loss, and I had no idea because it's not something that easily comes up in conversation. Um, and the other thing I found was so often I'd talk about this research and people would say, "Oh, my brother-in-law or my good friend or myself or my grandmother," or, I mean, so many people instantly kind of knew someone or had a connection to this topic. There's so many people who are in this boat. And yet it's a loss that, like you said, people could be going to therapy for a long time and their therapist wouldn't know, which is one reason it's great. Social workers use genograms to kind of map out family
Yeah.
structures. Like, it's really good to really do an in-depth, kind of look at people's family histories and losses, because it can be missed, and yet it's really important.
Yeah, it really is. Well, I am so glad that you opened up the door on this, and what an important topic. I'm going to be real interested in seeing what the feedback is on this. Absolutely. But could you name your book one more time so people, and like hold it up so
So the
people
book,
know where to
it's
find it?
available on Amazon.
Okay.
It's Born into Loss: Shadows of Deceased Siblings and Family Journeys of Grief. It's by myself and also by Joanne O'Leary. And here it is.
Love that picture. Well, guys, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to listen and or watch this really important, unique topic. And if you have any questions, and you have the ability to write, if this is on TikTok or if you're watching this on YouTube, write it down there in the comment section. I'm the one that monitors that. So if you're going to hear back from anybody, you're actually hearing right back from me. And be very curious if there's any follow-up questions that you have that I can pass over to Sarah, or if you have any feedback. I mean, does it sound familiar to you or not? And so I just want to say thank you so much for being willing to come on and taking some time on your day to do this. This was like nailing Jello to a tree, by the way, getting our schedules to cooperate, and it
Yeah.
finally worked. Um, but I do want to leave you guys with the thought that please just remember that it takes challenge to find the courage to heal. And I think to find that power in order to heal is an essential component of navigating and integrating the losses that we have in our lives and the traumas that we have in our lives. And so until next time, thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you, Chrissy. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Phoenix Rising with Dr. Z. If this episode helped, subscribe and share it with someone who needs it. We'll see you next time.